Oh, hi. Does your neck hurt? Are your shoulders sore? Does your back hurt? Wrists tense? Hips tight? I can't imagine why. The realities of sitting and working at a computer all day, especially a laptop, especially if you're working at home, just draws us into what I call laptop posture. So my chest closes down, my shoulders elevate and round, my neck folds in half. I've got what I call my computer slump hump between my shoulder blades, all the tension's going in my low back, and then when I go to stand up, my hips are really tight. So we're all dealing with this on a daily basis, but what do we do about it? I've put together a series of exercises that will progressively unwind the tension from your body to open up your shoulders, open up your wrists from being on a computer all day, get the tension out of your neck, address your posture, and loosen up your hips, all without ever having to leave your desk. You can go through the entire series at once, or if you're pressed for time, you can piecemeal it. You can stop for 2 minutes and go, oh, let me do something to open up my shoulders, get back to work. Oh, let me do something to release the tension on my wrists and get back to work. So let's start with shoulders. We're just going to do a really simple shoulder roll of drawing the shoulders up and back. Now, when you do the shoulder, think not only is it the round tennis ball part of the shoulder, but the shoulder blades are lifting up and going back, both at the same time. And then reverse. Bring them up and forward, up and forward. Couple more times. And one more. Now we're going to get into what I call the good morning wrist stretch, where you interlace your fingers, you turn the palms over, you stretch. So this starts opening up the wrist, getting us out of laptop hand. And we're going to start a little rotation side to side, starting to get some movement through your torso, through your thoracic spine, through your neck. And as you're twisting side to side, really kind of stretch through the wrist, that spot where Spider-Man would shoot out his web. We're reaching and going side to side. Try to look a little bit over your shoulder so we get out of that fixed head position of staring forward at a computer screen. One more each way. And back to center. Now let's transition into some forearm circles where you cross the arms into the rotation, lift the arms up to your forehead as you circle around to the other side, down across the chest. And this lift really starts getting you out of the slump hump posture, that thoracic spine between the shoulder blades. And we have a visitor. I'm sure you deal with that at home too. And one more time around. And then reverse the direction. And again. Let's do two more. And one more. Good. And now bring the hands forward. I love you, but you're going to be in my way. Hands together, palms even, and the arms are going side to side like a pendulum. Try not to bend the elbows. So a lot of times when you're tight, the idea is to try to do some forward stretching, but it's actually these rotational movements that will unwind you a lot more than static forward stretching. Now, next time you go to the right hold, we're going to bend the wrists without cupping the palms, kind of flattening the hands, and then bend them the other way as you go around. So this one I call snake charmer. As the wrists are going back and forth, we're starting to get kind of a little flow oscillation, and we're also getting some flexion extension back in the wrists in that carpal tunnel to open up what I call raccoon claw from typing all day. And let's do one more each way. And then rest. And you might notice, oh, my shoulders are actually a little bit back and open. That takes some tension off the neck. So now let's move on to wrists. And again, I'm going to find the base of that wrist where the carpal bones meet the arm bones, making a brace, and then bending the wrist backwards, not just grabbing the fingers. Here's a common mistake. I'm trying to stretch my wrist by pulling my fingers. That might stretch the flexor tendons in your palm, but it's not going to do anything for this row of carpal bones, and that's where we need the opening and the extension. Reaching through that Spider-Man spot, trying to stretch, and then make sure that you're not wearing that shoulder like an earring. Very common habit. And while you're holding, just try breathing. And release. And it might feel like, ooh, there's a little blood or circulation coming back into the hands. So now let's do what I call jazzy prayer hands. So the old school of jazz hands, spread the palms, spread the fingers. We're doing that on both hands. We're bringing them together in a prayer. And then I'm going to bend the elbows out to the side. I want to draw those shoulders back. And I'm just going to start tipping the wrists back and forth. So now we're articulating where the wrist comes into the arm bones, the radius, and the ulna, so that we have this movement in each direction. And back again. And just resist. When you turn it forward, there's a tendency to cup the palm and let the mitten part of the hand separate. Keep that flat. And when you tip forward, there's a tendency to lift the shoulders. Work against that. Pointing to use the easy part. It's the tipping forward. This is what we lose when the wrist tightens up. Now that we've got that, we're going to go back to rotating to the right. So I'm using my left hand. I'm kind of pushing my body. The right's resisting. And then I'm going to do the same tipping. And it's really subtle, but as I do this, it's actually stretching behind my right shoulder blade. And it's kind of winding up my rotation and allowing me to turn a little bit further. And then back to center, hello. And then we're going to do the same thing going to the left, like the right side is pushing, the left is resisting, but the right is winning. And I'm tipping those wrists back and forth without cupping the palms, which is causing that left shoulder to draw back, getting a little more rotation, getting a little taller on that side. And back to center, and release, shake them out. Good. Now, I love this one. I call this finger ballet. So your index finger is your little ballerina on point. And we're going to start with that pinky finger, kind of diving under the wrist so that the whole hand spins around and we're still pivoting on that index finger. Now the thumb side comes back around and turns under, and we go back and forth. So now we're getting that complete articulation through the wrist, but also through the forearm, and we're also getting our shoulder to turn back and forth. Now this turnout part, this is external rotation, that's easy. When I turn in, this is the hard part, and I just caught myself lifting that shoulder up, so I gotta anchor that guy. Back and forth. We're just gonna do the index finger right now, but sometimes I like going through the whole hand, because that release of each finger just gets us out of always being stuck in the flexors of our hand. Then we'll do the same thing on the left. That index finger spinning around, thumb side coming back under, back and forth, and just mindful of lifting that tennis ball part of the shoulder out of the socket. Everything that comes through the wrist has to go through the shoulder to get into our axial skeleton. So it's amazing how much of the work, the repetitive motion that we do with our hands can actually lead to a lot of neck tension. And release. Shake them out. Okay. So now that we've opened up shoulders and wrist, we're ready to do a little more work on the neck. So we're going to do some simple nose circles. We're going to bring the hands behind the back just because that opens up the chest and the collarbone. You might feel a little cross-eyed. You're going to look at the tip of your nose and you're just going to draw little circles, trying to keep your eyes on the nose. It's a small circle at first. I think around going about a quarter size as you go around. This is subtle, but it's getting some movement at the upper part of the spine where the base of the skull sits into the top of the spine. And then reverse the direction. And let's go around 2 more times. Sometimes this will make you feel almost a little heady or a slight head rush. Go back the other way and now make the circle bigger, like you're going around a donut. It's very natural. So all of those little tiny muscles at the base of the skull, they have sensors in them to tell your brain where you are in space for your balance. So when the head gets locked forward from staring over a computer, those muscles get locked. And as we're doing this tiny little rotation, those muscles are opening up. So then the nervous system has to recalibrate where you are in space. That's why you sometimes get dizzy and reverse. But we're seated in a chair, so the chances of getting dizzy and falling are pretty small. But if it makes you really dizzy, please stop. And let's go around 1 more time. And release. Okay, so I just mentioned where the base of the skull sits on those upper vertebrae. So if you take your index fingers and get right at the base of the skull, top of the neck, you can feel where the bony skull meets the squishy neck. There's a little soft spot in there, kind of an indentation. So this is our very first cervical vertebrae. And we're going to keep the index fingers in there. And I just want to tip the head the tiniest bit backwards over my fingers, which the fingers kind of sink into that indentation. And then I want to tip the head a little bit forward so it feels like the indentation fills in a little bit and there's not as much space for my fingers to sink inside. And it's just that little tipping back and forth. And as you do this, really try to make it small. We're not used to moving from the back of the head. We tend to do everything from the jaw, and that's a compensation for the neck being tight. And if we can restore this little nodding back and forth or flexion extension of the occiput, the base of the skull on C1, for those that like anatomy, we start getting that movement right back here. And as that kicks on, all of those upper trap muscles and all of those muscles that lift the shoulder blades up get to release. Now that we've got the head in a better position, we want to focus on breathing. So we want to activate our diaphragm. Diaphragm not only activates your core, but the deep breathing also calms your nervous system. It helps with your stress and your anxiety. And when we're locked here and the throat is too far forward, we're inhibiting how much air we can get down here, and we never take a full breath. And then we're always in a stressed fight or flight response. So getting into this diaphragm breath can be the opposite and help to relax you. So I just mentioned the head being too far forward. So I like finding the Adam's apple right in the center of the neck. And if I draw some breath into the back of my throat, like that breath is coming down behind the Adam's apple and filling up a little balloon, like I'm going to make more space in the throat, just by getting that breath back there, the head, the brain, starts making micro adjustments for where you are in space, because you can't be forward and get the breath behind the throat. So even if I go here and start breathing behind the Adam's apple, my head just draws back a little bit just from that inhale. And as this pathway opens up, now I can get more breath coming down the airway behind the breastbone, because we don't want to be closed down. We want to be able to open those ribs to get us out of the slump hump in the back. And as that breath comes down, now the breath can come down to the diaphragm, which is like a soccer ball that's sitting at the base of the ribs and the upper part of the abdomen. And I just think of that Adam's apple breath causing a little wide tube of air down to fill that soccer ball. And just the breath, I don't know if you could see it, but just that breath, my back just relaxed right here. So just with the proper breathing, it's very hard to go back to this posture. And then that breathing is just a constant reminder for your brain to realize, oh, you know what I was doing? And if I breathe, I can do the opposite. So then you can maintain what we're doing a little more regular throughout your day. Okay, so I just mentioned posture. So now we're ready to do some exercises that are focused a little more on posture. So for this one, I'm going to push my chair back a little bit. I'm going to scoot a little bit forward. And I'm going to take my hands under the chair just to give a little resistance, because this helps keep those shoulders open. So all I want to do is a hip hinge, because we have a tendency to be here. We need to be upright. So if I just try to kind of pull up from the bottom of the chair, that drops my shoulders back. So now when I'm hinging forward, I don't want to round my back because we just opened all that up. I want to hinge right over the belt line, right over my front pockets, so that I'm nice and straight between the shoulder blades and then coming back upright. So the image that I like, if my shoulder blades are magnets and there's a wall behind me, there's a little resistance. So I've got to work a little bit, which starts firing the muscles around the waist to hinge forward. And then I think those shoulder blade magnets pull me back. Now, when you hinge forward, don't let the head collapse. Remember, we need that open airway of that breath behind Adam's apple, heart, and diaphragm. And see, just by inhaling behind my Adam's apple, I went twice as far as I did on the last couple reps. That's what your breath can really do for you. And again. And one more time. So now that we've opened up the posture, let's take that up a notch by doing some seated back extension. We're going to bring both arms up, extending the wrists like you're holding 2 trays of martinis. And keep holding the left tray of martini in your left hand. Bring the right hand down a little bit behind you on the edge of the chair. You can push down into the chair, look up at the left hand, push that left tray of martinis up to the ceiling, and then bring the right arm back up. Switch, bring the left arm down, push into the chair through that left wrist, reach up through the right hand, looking up at that tray of martinis. And switch. Right hand down, a little push through the right, a little reach through the left. And switch. Left hand down, a little push through the right, a little reach. And one more each side. And last one. And release. Good. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit taller. So let's take that into a side stretch. So if you take your right hand and hold under the chair, kind of pull a little bit, left arm is up, bend your right elbow. You're pulling down on that side, looking up at the left hand, getting a little side bend, and back up. And then switch, pull, bend the left elbow, reach and look up at that right hand. And switch, pull with the right, reach up with the left, hold, check in with that breath. Breathe behind the Adam's apple, breathe through the breastbone, fill in that soccer ball diaphragm. Oh, and I just went a little further. and back up and switch. See, I have to remind myself all the time to check in with that breath. Adam's apple, breastbone, diaphragm. And let's do one more each way. And back up. And last one. And release. Well, my neck is feeling a lot more mobile because I spent a lot of time on my phone this morning and I could feel it, and that's all beginning to unwind. So now let's do one more seated extension. You're going to bring both arms up a little wider than the shoulders. Extend the palms like you're holding the ceiling in place. And we're going to draw the head a little bit backwards. Think of that little tip backwards over that squishy spot at the base of the skull that we had our head. So now you're looking up at the ceiling. You're showing your heart to the ceiling. You're filling in your breath, Adam's apple, breastbone, that soccer ball diaphragm. And back down. And again, arms up, extend. Head back a little bit, tip the head the tiniest bit backwards. Show the heart to the ceiling, fill in the breath. And down. And one more time. This one always makes me think of the Shawshank Redemption poster. But maybe I'm dating myself. And down. So now, it's kind of hard to go back to that slouch because now that my body's open, it doesn't like it when I try to go back into that position. And it says, nope, you belong back here. So now we're ready to do some hip work. I'm going to scoot back a little bit more so you can see what I'm doing. I want my feet on the floor for this one, so if you got to scoot a little bit further. This is a little knee pressure series, and it's to get some movement in the back of the hips and around your tailbone. So I'm just going to take my hands on the outside of my knees. I want to hinge a little bit forward. Don't go back to the rounded back. And I'm just going to create a little pressure that my thighs are trying to push open and my hands are stopping them. Not a ton of effort, not so much that you're starting to tense and struggle and put all that tension back in your neck that we just took out. And then we go to the inner thigh, and we're trying to squeeze the legs in, and the hands are resisting. And back and forth. This one's good on an airplane also. And back and forth. And it's subtle, but all of this is getting that leg to kind of sink back into the socket a little bit. It's really natural if you've been sitting to feel a tight hip flexor. Get a little snarky when you're doing this. Back and forth. One more each way. And release. So now that we have more ability to hinge in the hips and get a little more weight on the feet, let's do some movement of the calves, because when we sit all day, our foot just kind of hangs out and doesn't do anything. So we want to loosen that up, not only because the ankle mobility is good, we're going to lift the heels and drive the ball of the toes into the floor. And even if you're wearing shoes, you can still do this. And then push the heels down and lift the toes. And lift the heels, push the toes. Push the heels down, lift the toes. So that ankle mobility is really important, because if you sit all day and your foot's kind of sickled in the same way that your hand was in raccoon claw, when you stand up and start walking or get up and decide, well, now I'm going to go run because my workday is over, you're going to have some problems with your knees, your hip, and your back. Plus, that calf motion is really important for your circulation, because the movement of that calf muscle stimulates the blood to return back to your heart. This is also good on an airplane. In fact, they give this to people who have DVT and have to wear those compression socks. And sitting upright. Okay, so now we can take it up a notch because we can hinge forward. And now we're ready to engage the glutes and come up to a standing position. And then we're going to hinge back without rounding the back, staying nice and open. Fill in the breath, fill in the diaphragm, and back. Hinging upright like I'm picking my back pockets off the chair. Hinging like my back pockets are reaching for the chair, and then those shoulder blade magnets bring me upright. Hinging, lifting the back pockets, hinging back and down. We're just going to do 4 of these right now, but if you're feeling ambitious, knock out a set of 10. And that was 4. So now we're going to stay upright. So you might feel more comfortable doing this one at home. In the office, people might look at you a little strangely, but if you're upright, I like doing just a little hula hoop to loosen up that full range of motion around the hips. About 8 around, and then 8 in the other direction. And 5. You still breathing? And then whirling dervish. Let your head turn. Look over your shoulder at the wall behind you. Get out of staring at an electronic screen for 12 hours at a time. And sit. Now, when you go back to work, hopefully you feel much more open, much more upright. And that's our desk reset.